When I collapsed on the boardroom floor, the emergency room doctor called my parents 6 times. They never answered. 6 hours later, I walked out of the hospital into the freezing Chicago snow and opened my phone. There was no message asking if I was alive. Instead, my sister had just posted a picture of my entire family drinking wine at the lake house. The caption read, "Finally a weekend without the drama queen." So I made one phone call and sold the house they were sitting in. Who is dramatic now? I am Vivian. I am 56 years old, and I am the vice president of operations for a supply chain firm in Chicago. I am used to handling multi-million-dollar crises for thousands of employees, but I never anticipated the crisis created by my own flesh and blood. Before I tell you how I dismantled their entitlement in less than 3 minutes, take a moment to like and subscribe, especially if you have ever been the person who pays all the bills, but is the last one remembered when you fall apart. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I would love to know where you are watching from. Let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in November, the day my body finally kept the score. I was standing at the head of a mahogany conference table pointing at quarterly projections when the room suddenly tilted. My chest tightened like a steel band. The pen slipped from my fingers. I remember the sound of my own knees hitting the hardwood and the frantic shouting of my board members before everything went black. I woke up to the harsh fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital. The steady beep of a heart monitor echoed in my ears. Stress-induced cardiac event, the doctor told me. You are lucky you were not alone when it happened. He held up my phone. We tried calling your emergency contacts, Harrison and Beverly Pierce. We called them 6 times over the last 4 hours. We even left voicemails saying you were in the emergency room. No one picked up. I stared at the ceiling. The cold monitor wires taped to my chest felt heavier than they should. My parents were retired. They did not have jobs. They did not have pressing obligations. They were just too busy living the life I funded for them to pick up the phone. The nurse looked at me with a soft, pitying expression that made my stomach churn. She asked if there was anyone else they could call, maybe a friend or my sister. I shook my head. I knew exactly where my sister Chloe was. She was busy being the golden child. I pulled the blanket back and asked for the discharge papers. The hospital advised against leaving, warning me about the risks of a secondary event, but I signed the forms anyway. Nobody was coming for me. I hailed a cab outside. The November wind cut right through my thin hospital scrubs and the oversized coat the nurses found for me. Sitting in the back of the taxi, shivering and utterly exhausted, I opened Instagram to distract myself from the pain in my chest. That is when I saw it. A photo of my parents, my 42-year-old sister Chloe and her husband Marcus, toasting with champagne glasses by the stone fireplace of the Lake Geneva property. The property I secretly bought out of foreclosure 12 years ago to save my parents from bankruptcy. They were celebrating while I was fighting for my breath. Let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in November, the day my body finally kept the score. I was standing at the head of a massive mahogany conference table in downtown Chicago, pointing at quarterly projections for my supply chain team. The room was full of executives. Suddenly the floor seemed to drop out from under me. The room tilted violently to the left. A sudden crushing pressure clamped down on my chest like a steel band tightening around my ribs. The dry erase marker slipped from my numb fingers and bounced on the carpet. I could not breathe. I remember the sharp sound of my own knees hitting the hardwood floor. I remember the frantic shouting of my board members. Someone yelled to call 911. Then the edges of my vision turned gray and everything went entirely black. I woke up hours later to the harsh, blinding fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital. The air smelled of strong antiseptic and bleached sheets. The steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor echoed loudly in my ears. I tried to shift my weight, but a dull, agonizing ache radiated down my left arm and across my collarbone. A doctor in dark blue scrubs walked into the room. He was holding a clipboard in one hand and my personal cell phone in the other. He looked at me with a very serious expression. Stress-induced cardiac event, he told me. Your body simply gave out from exhaustion. You are incredibly lucky your colleagues acted as quickly as they did. He pulled a small plastic chair to the side of my bed and let out a heavy sigh. We tried calling your emergency contacts, Harrison and Beverly Pierce. We called them 6 times over the last 6 hours. We even left multiple urgent voicemails, letting them know you collapsed and were brought to the emergency room. No one picked up. I turned my head and stared at the blank white ceiling. The cold monitor wires taped to my chest felt heavier than they should. My parents were fully retired. They did not have jobs. They did not have demanding schedules or pressing obligations. They lived in a beautiful house and spent their days attending country club luncheons and wine tastings, all of which I paid for. They were just too busy living the luxurious life I funded for them to pick up the phone when their eldest daughter was fighting for her life. The doctor gently placed my phone on the rolling tray table next to my bed. "We need to monitor your heart rate for a few more hours," he said quietly before stepping out into the busy hallway. I lay there entirely alone, listening to the mechanical hum of the hospital machinery. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick away the minutes. Every single time footsteps approached my door, my heart would jump. I kept hoping it would be my father walking in with his usual booming voice, or my mother rushing to my bedside to hold my hand, but the footsteps always walked past my room and faded down the hall. 6 full hours went by. The silence in that hospital room was louder and more painful than any screaming match my family ever had. It was the sound of complete and utter abandonment. A young nurse came in to check my vitals and adjust my intravenous drip. She looked at me with a soft, pitying expression that immediately made my stomach churn. She hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "Your family still has not called back," she said, her voice filled with quiet sympathy. "Is there anyone else we can call? Maybe a friend or a sister or a neighbor?" I closed my eyes tightly. I knew exactly where my sister Chloe was. She was probably at a high-end salon getting a hot stone massage or shopping for a new designer outfit using the supplementary credit card I gave her last year. I shook my head slowly on the thin hospital pillow. "No," I told the nurse. "There is no one else." The dark reality of my life washed over me like freezing ice water. I was surrounded by hundreds of people at work. I had thousands of professional contacts in my phone. I single-handedly paid for the livelihoods of 4 different family members. But in the exact moment I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if my heart was going to stop beating, I had absolutely no one. I was nothing but a walking bank account to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I pulled the scratchy hospital blanket up to my chin. The monitor continued its steady rhythmic beeping. That was the exact moment something fundamental inside me shattered permanently. And it was not my heart. It was my endless patience. I realized I had spent my entire adult life setting myself on fire just to keep my family warm, and they would not even bother to notice if I burned to ashes. I looked at the young nurse and told her to bring me the discharge papers. I was done waiting for people who were never going to show up. I signed the discharge papers against medical advice with a hand that was still trembling. The attending physician told me I was making a terrible mistake and risking my life. I looked him directly in the eye and told him the real mistake was waiting in a room for people who were never going to arrive. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, and the brutal Chicago wind hit me instantly. It was snowing heavily. Thick flakes melted against the cheap hospital-issued sweatpants and the oversized gray sweater a kind nurse had donated to me. I stood on the freezing sidewalk and hailed a yellow cab. The heater inside the car was broken. I gave the driver the address to my downtown apartment and slumped against the cracked leather seat. My chest still ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, but my mind had never been more clear. I pulled my cell phone out of my coat pocket. The screen lit up in the dark cab, illuminating my pale and exhausted face. I stared at the blank notification center. I waited for a second, hoping the screen would refresh. 0 missed calls, 0 new text messages, not even a generic automated check-in from my mother. Nothing but complete silence. I opened the Instagram app. It was simply muscle memory looking for something to fill the terrifying void of that cab ride. The very first picture at the top of my feed had been posted exactly 45 minutes ago. It was from my younger sister, Chloe. The location tag proudly displayed Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It was the family vacation house. The massive 5-bedroom lakeside property with the custom stone fireplace and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. In the photo, my 78-year-old father, Harrison, was leaning back in an imported leather recliner. He was holding a glass of expensive scotch and smiling broadly. My mother, Beverly, was laughing at something off camera. Her perfectly manicured hand was resting affectionately on my sister's shoulder. And then there was Chloe standing next to her husband, Marcus. Marcus was a smooth-talking man who always wore clothes he could not afford. He looked incredibly sharp in his custom-tailored cashmere sweater, raising a bottle of $300 Cabernet toward the camera. A bottle I recognized immediately because I was the one who bought it for them last Christmas. They all looked so incredibly happy. They looked warm and safe and completely undisturbed. They looked like a picture-perfect family enjoying a beautiful winter getaway while their eldest daughter was fighting for her life alone in a sterile room. Then I read the caption beneath the photo. Finally, a relaxing weekend without the drama queen. It was followed by a little clinking wine glass emoji. I stared at those words while the taxi hit a pothole on Michigan Avenue. The drama queen. I had just spent the last 6 hours hooked up to machines wondering if my heart was going to permanently give out. I had spent the last 2 decades paying their mortgages and covering their luxury car leases. I had funded Marcus and his endless string of failed startup ideas because my sister begged me to support her husband. And this was my reward. This was what I truly meant to them. I was nothing but a dramatic inconvenience who finally had the decency to stay away so they could enjoy their weekend in peace. I zoomed in on the photo using my thumb and index finger. I looked at the beautiful stone fireplace behind them. I looked at the expensive Persian rug under their feet and the antique oak dining table in the background. They were sitting inside a house they genuinely believed my father still owned. A house they treated as their inherited royal estate. They had absolutely no idea that 12 years ago, when my father was drowning in hidden debt and facing total bankruptcy, I was the one who intervened. I quietly bought that exact property directly from the bank through a private limited liability company. I saved them from public humiliation and let them pretend it was still theirs. I let them keep their arrogant pride, while I silently paid the exorbitant property taxes every single year. The screen of my phone went dark. The deep sadness that had been suffocating me back in the hospital room completely evaporated into the cold air. It was instantly replaced by something else, something cold and hard and sharply focused. I did not cry a single tear. I did not type an angry comment demanding an explanation. I did not call my mother to scream at her. People who scream are just begging to be heard and understood. I was completely done begging for their love. I tapped the screen once to wake it up and took a screenshot of the photo. I wanted to keep it forever. Then I locked my phone and looked out the window at the frozen city streets blurring past me. "You want a weekend without the drama queen?" I whispered softly to the empty cab. "You are going to get the rest of your lives without her." The next morning, I woke up alone in my empty apartment in Chicago. The gray winter light filtered weakly through the curtains. The pain in my chest had faded into a dull, lingering throb, but the exhaustion had sunk deep into my bones. I made myself a cup of black coffee and sat down on the sofa. I stared at my phone screen. The image of my happy family at the Lake Geneva house the night before still haunted me. I decided to call my mother, Beverly. Not because I was looking for comfort or love, I just wanted to hear her cruelty in her own words. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Soft music played in the background, along with the delicate clinking of expensive porcelain teacups. "Good morning, Vivian," my mother said in an even tone, without the slightest trace of concern. "I hope you've calmed down by now. The hospital called yesterday and nearly gave your father and me a heart attack. Your father almost spilled his favorite glass of wine." I tightened my grip around my coffee cup. The hospital called 6 times Mom. I collapsed at work. The doctor said I had a heart attack from overwork. I was lying in the emergency room for 6 hours, and not one person in this family came to get me. Beverly let out a long, dramatic sigh over the phone. It was the kind of sigh people use when dealing with a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, Vivian, would you please stop being so dramatic?" Marcus already explained everything to the family. He said it was just a mild panic attack. Marcus read an article about psychology and he said your condition matched it perfectly. You've been under stress lately because your sister Chloe is starting such a wonderful new startup project. Marcus said you've always had a tendency to create tragic little stories whenever you feel like you're no longer the center of attention. I went completely still. I was the CEO of a major corporation. I managed supply chains worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And Marcus? He was an unemployed parasite in shiny suits living off the credit cards I paid every month. Yet my mother would rather believe the ridiculous amateur diagnosis of a freeloader than the chief emergency doctor at Chicago Central Hospital. "What exactly are you saying, Mom?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. "That I'm jealous of Chloe. That Marcus's new startup project is just another useless sales gimmick. I'll end up working myself to death to pay off by the end of the year." "Vivian, you are truly so bitter," my mother replied, her voice turning thin and sharp with accusation. "That is exactly why this family sometimes needs a little space to breathe. Yesterday was a beautiful weekend day at the lake house. Your father and I just wanted some peaceful, relaxing time with the children who actually appreciate family values. You are always demanding attention in the most exhausting way. You cannot keep using your health to emotionally blackmail everyone. Stop being such a drama queen, Vivian. Grow up." She used the words "grow up" on me. On the 56-year-old woman who had spent 12 years bent over paying her mortgage, on the woman who had bought every business-class plane ticket for her vacations. "So you have nothing to ask about whether I'm okay?" I asked slowly one final time. My mother clicked her tongue in irritation. "You've always been perfectly capable of taking care of yourself, Vivian. You're stronger than necessary, really. I have to go now. Marcus is making breakfast for the whole family on the terrace. Don't call back until you have a better attitude." The cold beep of the disconnected line echoed in my ear. Slowly, I lowered the phone into my lap. Her words didn't make me shed a single tear. They felt more like a powerful antidote. Every last illusion I had about blood ties had just been crushed by my own mother's hands and thrown straight into the trash. I was no longer the dutiful eldest daughter killing herself to keep her parents happy. Yesterday's heart attack hadn't killed me, but it had permanently killed my foolish tolerance. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. It was time to stop playing the role of a mindless bank for people with no heart. Top of form, bottom of form. I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the sofa. The silence in my apartment was heavy and cold. I walked over to the kitchen island. Lying right next to my coffee mug was the discharge paperwork from the hospital. Tucked neatly behind the medical instructions was the preliminary itemized bill from the emergency room. I pulled it out and stared at the numbers printed in stark black ink. Thousands of dollars for the ambulance ride. Thousands more for the emergency room bed and the cardiac monitoring equipment. I looked at the massive total at the bottom of the page, but I did not panic. I knew I could pay it immediately. I had always been the one who could pay for everything. I ran my fingers over the crisp white paper, and my mind drifted back over the last 20 years of my life. 2 decades completely consumed by my parents' desperate need to appear wealthy to people who did not actually care about them. My parents wanted the exclusive country club memberships. They wanted the imported European luxury cars in the driveway. They wanted to host lavish dinner parties at the Grand Vacation House in Lake Geneva. When my father made terrible financial decisions and secretly lost his entire pension 12 years ago, I was the one who quietly stepped in. I worked 80-hour weeks. I skipped my own vacations. I sacrificed my own personal life and the chance to build a family of my own. I poured every single corporate bonus and every promotion into keeping their perfect upper-class image alive. I secretly bought the lake house out of foreclosure through a private company just so my father would not suffer the public embarrassment of his friends finding out he was entirely broke. I was the invisible foundation holding up their house of cards. And then there was my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe never had to worry about a single mortgage payment or a utility bill. She was the golden child. She was the family star who was celebrated simply for existing. And when she married Marcus, my parents treated him like absolute royalty. Marcus was a smooth-talking African-American man with $1 million smile and a closet full of clothes he could not afford. He had absolutely zero work ethic, but he knew exactly how to manipulate my parents. Marcus always wore custom-tailored suits to family dinners and spoke confidently about his visionary tech startups and his disruptive business models. He used big corporate buzzwords to impress my father, but his companies never actually existed. He was a professional scam artist, and his only successful targets were his own family members. Every single time Marcus had a new brilliant business idea, he would pitch it at the dining room table while pouring my father another glass of expensive wine. My parents would look at him with pure admiration. Then they would turn their heads to look at me and expect me to write the check to fund it. If I ever hesitated or asked to see a basic business plan or a revenue model, they called me unsupportive. They called me selfish and bitter. They told me I was just jealous of Chloe for finding such a driven and charismatic husband. I was the one funding their entire luxurious existence, but Marcus was the one they respected. I was just the silent bank account. I was the reliable workhorse. They were the beautiful show ponies. I looked back down at the hospital bill on the granite counter. I traced the total amount with my index finger. A sudden, sickening realization washed over me. If my heart had actually stopped beating yesterday, my parents would not have genuinely mourned the loss of their eldest daughter. They would have mourned the loss of their primary income source. They would have panicked about how to pay the country club dues next month. They would have wondered who was going to pay off the credit card Marcus used for his expensive suits. That realization was incredibly painful, but it was also profoundly liberating. The heavy burden of guilt and obligation I had carried on my shoulders for 20 years simply vanished into thin air. I was finally free from the illusion that I could earn their love by paying their debts. I neatly folded the hospital bill and threw it into the trash can. I did not need a reminder of what it cost to survive them. I walked into my home office and woke up my computer. It was time to show my family what happens when the bank finally closes its doors. I sat down at my polished oak desk and opened my laptop. I needed to clear my head. Usually looking at spreadsheets and supply chain logistics helped ground me. I logged into my secure corporate email account. My inbox was filled with the usual daily reports and meeting requests from my operations team. But right at the top of the screen, one unread message caught my immediate attention. It was not from anyone at my company. It was an automated alert from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. My heart skipped a heavy beat. 12 years ago, when I quietly purchased the Lake Geneva house out of foreclosure to save my parents from complete financial ruin, I registered the property under a private limited liability company. I set up automated alerts for any legal or financial activity tied to that specific tax identification number. For over a decade, that inbox folder had been completely empty. Until today. I double-clicked the email to open it. The bold black text on the screen felt like a physical blow to my chest. It was a formal notification of a pending commercial lien. Someone was attempting to use the exact tax ID and physical address of the Lake Geneva property to secure a $1.5 million commercial mortgage loan. I leaned closer to the monitor. I could not believe what I was reading. I quickly downloaded the attached preliminary application document. There, listed under this primary applicant name, was Marcus Davis, my smooth-talking, perpetually unemployed brother-in-law. He had listed his fake technology startup as the borrowing entity. And right below his name, listed as the primary guarantor offering the property as collateral, was the forged signature of my father, Harrison Pierce. A cold wave of absolute disgust washed over my entire body. They were not just ignoring me while I was fighting for my life in an emergency room. They were actively trying to steal from me. Marcus had somehow convinced my father that he still held the legal authority to borrow against a house that had been foreclosed on a decade ago, and my father, completely blinded by his desperate need to feel like a wealthy patriarch, had actually agreed to give Marcus the house, a house he did not even own. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Marcus was trying to extract $1.5 million in cash to fund another one of his lavish fantasy lifestyles, and he was using the roof over my parents' heads to do it. If the bank had actually approved this fraudulent loan, my parents would have been thrown out onto the street the moment Marcus inevitably defaulted on the payments. They were literally handing the keys to their own destruction to a con artist. I sat back in my leather office chair and took a deep, steadying breath. My chest still hurt from the cardiac event the day before, but my mind was sharper than a surgical scalpel. I did not panic. I did not pick up the phone to scream at my father for his unbelievable stupidity. I did not text my sister to tell her that her husband was a criminal. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed the direct private number of my personal real estate attorney. He answered on the second ring. I told him to immediately block the fraudulent loan application using my corporate ownership documents. But I did not stop there. I instructed him to draft an expedited sales contract for the Lake Geneva property. I told him I wanted it listed and sold to the highest cash buyer by the end of the week. They wanted to act like they owned the castle. They wanted to treat me like a disposable peasant who only existed to fund their royal delusions. It was time to show them exactly who held the deed to the kingdom. 3 days had passed since I walked out of the hospital into the freezing snowfall. I was sitting in my quiet apartment in Chicago, wearing an oversized gray sweater to hide the bruises on my left arm from the IV needles. The heavy silence of the morning was suddenly shattered by a loud, forceful knock at the door. I wasn't expecting any visitors. I slowly walked over and looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway were my 78-year-old father, Harrison, and my brother-in-law, Marcus. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. They did not wait to be invited in. My father shoved past me and strode straight into the living room, dragging a wave of icy wind in from the street. Marcus followed right behind him, dressed in a perfectly tailored, expensive wool coat. Neither of them carried a bowl of hot soup. Neither held flowers or a card. They did not even glance at my pale, exhausted face or ask whether my heartbeat had stabilized. Marcus walked straight into the living room and stopped in front of my expensive glass coffee table. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. He threw it down onto the glass with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the empty apartment. I crossed my arms over my chest and stared at the two of them. "What is this about?" I asked, my voice calm in a way that felt dangerous. My father did not sit down. He stood upright, trying to project the authority of a wealthy patriarch issuing orders to his family. "I'm making some administrative changes to the family asset portfolio, Vivian," he said smoothly. "Your sister Chloe and Marcus are about to launch a very important technology venture. They need capital to scale the business properly. I've decided to transfer ownership of the Lake Geneva house directly to Chloe so they can use it as collateral for a commercial loan." I looked at my father, then at Marcus. Marcus stood there wearing a smug, confident smile. He truly believed he had already won. My father pointed a wrinkled finger at the stack of papers on the glass table. "That is a standard legal waiver of inheritance rights," he continued without the slightest hesitation. "Since you are the eldest daughter and technically have a financial interest in the family estate, the bank requires your signature. You need to sign a statement agreeing not to contest this transfer of property. Marcus even brought his best pen for you to use." I stared at the documents. The sheer audacity of their request made me feel like I could barely breathe. 3 days ago, I had nearly died from exhaustion while carrying the weight of their fake millionaire lifestyle. And their immediate response to my near death was to show up at my apartment demanding that I surrender my rights to a house I had effectively paid for in full. They wanted me to smile and hand over the keys to a $1.5 million property so Marcus could keep pretending to be an entrepreneur. "You want me to sign away my inheritance rights?" I asked slowly, letting every word hang clearly in the air. "You want me to give up my interest in the lake house so Marcus can use it as collateral for a business that doesn't even exist yet?" Marcus let out a short laugh, full of condescension. "Come on, Vivian," he said, taking a step closer to me. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're a single woman with a gigantic executive salary. You don't have a husband. You don't have children to worry about. What do you need a 5-bedroom vacation house for? Chloe and I are building a legacy. You should be happy to help your sister secure her financial future." My father nodded in agreement. "You have always been selfish with your money, Vivian," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "This is your chance to finally be a caring older sister and help your sibling. Sign the paper. Don't turn this into another one of your dramatic scenes." I looked at the bruise on my arm, then back at my father. I did not scream. I did not throw the documents in their faces. I took a deep breath and let a pale, hollow smile appear on my lips. "I'll sign it," I said softly, "but I'm not signing something this important on a glass table in the middle of the week." This Sunday is Mother's birthday party at the Lake Geneva house. The whole family and all the friends will be there. I'll bring these papers with me and I'll sign them in front of everyone. Marcus beamed, completely unaware of the deadly trap I had just laid for him. "That sounds perfect," he said, fastening the button of his expensive coat. "See, Vivian? It feels good to finally do the right thing for the family, doesn't it?" They walked out of my apartment, leaving the documents behind. I locked the door and turned back to the table. I picked up the stack of papers and fed it straight into the shredder. I didn't need their fake legal documents. I already had the real paperwork in my hands. And on Sunday, I was going to serve it to them on a silver tray. My father took another step into the middle of my apartment living room. He did not even remove his overcoat. He stood there with the posture of a man who had spent his entire life expecting everyone around him to obey his commands. "I've given a great deal of thought to our family's financial future." He began, his tone slow and dripping with condescension. "I've decided to transfer full ownership of the Lake Geneva vacation house to my youngest daughter and her husband. I want Chloe and Marcus to have a solid foundation." I stood there in silence with my arms crossed over my chest. I could feel my heartbeat starting to pound harder, but I forced myself to keep my breathing steady. I was still recovering from the heart attack I had suffered 3 days earlier. "Marcus is about to launch an extremely promising tech startup," my father continued. "This project needs a large amount of capital in order to scale. I've agreed to let Marcus use the Lake Geneva house as collateral for a $1.5 million commercial loan from the bank. But since you are this eldest daughter, the bank's lawyer requires your signature to ensure that you will not file a lawsuit or dispute this inheritance asset in the future. I need you to sign the waiver immediately." He said those words so smoothly and casually that I could hardly believe what I was hearing. He was standing in my own home demanding that I sign away my claim to another house that I had personally paid for 12 years ago. He wanted me to hand over the sweat and blood of my life so his lazy son-in-law could have money to run his scam. Before I could even respond, Marcus stepped forward. He flashed the half-smile he probably thought was charming. Then he reached out and patted my shoulder in a patronizing way. "Come on, Vivian," he said in a voice coated with sweetness and poison. "Don't look at your father like you want to shoot him. We're all family here. You have to understand what this family is going through right now." I brushed his hand off my shoulder. He frowned for a second, then quickly forced that fake smile back onto his face. "Listen," Vivian, Marcus said, lowering his voice as if he were being compassionate. "You're 56 years old now. You don't have a husband, children, or any real family burdens. You're a CEO with a massive salary, more money than a woman living alone could ever spend in a lifetime. What do you even need with a 5-bedroom lakeside mansion? Chloe and I are different. We're still young, and we're trying to build an empire." He pointed at the stack of documents on the table. "Let your sister have a chance to change her life, Vivian. You've already lived your life. You've already had your career. Now it's time for you to step aside and give the stage to the next generation. Signing that paper is the best way to prove that you truly love your sister and that you're no longer the selfish drama queen everyone thinks you are." I stood there and listened to every cruel, manipulative word that came out of his mouth. They did not just want to steal my property. They wanted to strip me of my worth as a human being. They treated my independence and success as an excuse to exploit me. Because I had no husband or children in their eyes, I had no right to own property of my own. Because I knew how to make money, I was automatically expected to become a free gold mine for them to dig into. Their shamelessness had crossed every boundary of basic human decency. They did not see me as family. They saw me as a dairy cow they needed to milk dry before throwing out of the barn. I stared at the inheritance waiver with my name already printed on it. The black lines of text on the white paper looked like a death sentence for the foolish kindness I had wasted on them for the past 20 years. I looked down at the stack of documents on the glass table. A heavy silence settled over the living room. My father stood there with his arms crossed, waiting. Marcus wore a smug half-smile, expecting me to break and give in like I always had. But I did not cry. I did not rage, scream, or throw things. Anger is an emotion reserved for people who still hope the other side might come to their senses. I had no hope left for either of them. The stillness in my mind was cold and sharp as a blade. Slowly, I reached down and smoothed the front of my sweater. Then I lifted my head and looked Marcus straight in the eyes. There was no fear in my gaze, no sadness. I looked at him with the eyes of someone completely in control. "This is a $1.5 million asset," I said, my voice low and perfectly calm. "It is far too valuable to be signed away hastily on a coffee table in the middle of the week. A legal document, this important one that waives inheritance rights, needs to be handled properly with formality and due process." My father frowned, clearly annoyed. "What are you trying to pull now, Vivian?" he snapped. "I already told you Marcus needs that paper immediately so he can submit it to the bank. Stop deliberately delaying your brother-in-law's business." "I'm not delaying anything," I replied, my voice still smooth and unreadable. "I simply want everything done according to the law. This Sunday is Mother's birthday party. You invited all your close friends, the relatives, and the family attorney to the Lake Geneva house, didn't you? I'll bring these papers there. I'll sign away my rights publicly in front of everyone so no one can question the legality of it." Marcus blinked. The smile on his lips loosened for just a second. He seemed to be trying to figure out whether I was setting a trap for him. But greed and the arrogance of a con man clouded his judgment. He could not resist the image of watching me surrender publicly in front of everyone. The thought of me personally handing over my property to him at a family party was exactly the humiliation he and my sister had always wanted. "All right," Marcus said, his triumph barely concealed. "If you want to make this dramatic and official, then we're happy to indulge you. This Sunday, at the lake house. Just make sure you bring the paper and don't change your mind." "I'll be there on time," I said to my father. "And I promise you this will be a birthday party our family will never forget." My father let out a cold grunt, then turned and walked out the door. Marcus followed behind him, throwing me one last pitying glance over his shoulder. The door slammed shut. I stood alone in the living room. My heartbeat was slow and steady now. They thought I had accepted defeat. They thought that on Sunday I would step onto the stage and hand over my crown. What they did not know was that I had already prepared a death sentence for all of their illusions, and I was going to carry it out myself right on the stage they had built. That Sunday, the sky was clear and bitterly cold. Ice covered the surface of Lake Geneva, reflecting the harsh winter sunlight. I drove my SUV down the tree-lined road leading to the 5-bedroom mansion. Expensive cars were parked on both sides, stretching from the front gate all the way to the stone steps. Sleek European luxury vehicles gleamed under the pale winter sun. My parents had spared no expense in throwing a lavish birthday party to impress the fake high society crowd they had always been desperate to be accepted by. I parked at the very end of the driveway and stepped out. I was not wearing a soft floral dress or some elaborate party outfit. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit with razor-sharp lines. It looked more like armor than party wear. My chest still ached faintly from my recent collapse, but I stood tall and climbed the stone steps with steady strides. The moment I opened the door and walked in, a wave of warm air hit my face thick with the scent of expensive perfume and rich food. In the enormous living room, 25 people stood in little clusters. The atmosphere was suffocating with pretense. My parents' country club friends held crystal champagne flutes in their hands. A few men in pinstriped suits stood around Marcus, nodding along as he bragged about his imaginary technology ventures. I stepped into the room, but not a single person turned to welcome me. No one came over to ask whether I had recovered from my heart attack. My father stood by the fireplace, speaking animatedly with the family's elderly lawyer. My mother, Beverly, wearing a jade silk dress, glided past me, carrying a tray of drinks. She paused for half a second, her eyes sweeping over me from head to toe. "Vivian," she said quietly, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Why are you wearing all black to your mother's birthday party? You look like you're dressed for a funeral. You should have chosen something brighter. Really, this is so inappropriate." Then she walked away instantly, putting on a bright smile for another guest. I stood there in that luxurious room, one that had been bought with my money, and looked at all of them. My sister Chloe stood near the bar giggling and stroking a brand new pearl necklace. She had probably bought it with my credit card. They ignored my existence completely, as if I were nothing more than a maid who had accidentally wandered into an aristocratic gathering. But I did not feel hurt. I did not feel sad. On the contrary, I felt incredibly clear-headed. The fact that they treated me like a ghost inside a house that actually belonged to me made the whole performance even more perfect. The more arrogant they were, the more completely they ignored me, the more painful their collapse would be when it came. Marcus noticed me from across the room. He did not come over. He only curled his lip into a smug smile and lifted his champagne glass in my direction like a gesture of victory. He whispered something to the men around him, and they all burst out laughing. He thought my black suit was a sign of surrender. He thought I had come here to bow my head and hand everything over to him. I did not say a word. Calmly, I walked to the drink table, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and chose a quiet corner near the window. I stood there silently watching their absurd little performance. I was waiting. I was waiting for the moment Marcus and my father would step onto the stage and publicly demand the crown from my hands. They wanted to turn me into a pitiful spectacle in front of these 25 guests. What they did not know was that I had already turned that room into an execution chamber, and I was the one holding the switch. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne glass cut through the low hum of conversation. I turned my head away from the window. Marcus was standing at the head of the long dining table in the center of the room. He was holding up his glass and flashing that $1,000,000 smile that had successfully scammed my family for years. The 25 guests slowly quieted down and gathered around him. My father stood proudly to his right, and my mother stood to his left. My sister Chloe was clinging to his arm, looking at him like he was the most brilliant man in the world. I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate my wonderful mother-in-law, Beverly Marcus, began his voice echoing loudly across the high vaulted ceilings of the lake house. But today is not just about celebrating a birthday. It is about celebrating family legacy. As many of you know, Chloe and I are on the verge of launching a massive technology startup that will revolutionize our industry. But visionary ideas need a solid foundation. He paused dramatically and looked warmly at my parents. Harrison and Beverly have always been the true visionaries of this family. They understand that real wealth is about building the future. That is why they have graciously decided to transfer the full ownership of this beautiful lakefront estate to Chloe and me. We will be using this incredible property as the collateral to secure our corporate financing. They are passing the torch, and we could not be more honored. A gentle murmur of approval rippled through the room. The wealthy friends of my parents nodded in deep admiration. They raised their glasses in a polite toast. My father puffed out his chest, soaking in the fake glory of being a generous patriarch. My mother beamed with pride. Chloe looked straight across the room and locked eyes with me. She tilted her head slightly and gave me a smirk so full of arrogance and malice it made my blood run cold. She wanted to make sure I knew exactly what was happening. She thought she was taking the only thing I had ever bought for myself. "Thank you, Marcus," my father said loudly, stepping forward to take control of the room. "We are thrilled to support your vision. But as my lawyer informed me, there is one small piece of administrative housekeeping we need to take care of today to finalize the transfer." My father turned his head and scanned the room until his eyes landed on me standing quietly in my black suit by the window. The entire room shifted their attention to follow his gaze. 25 pairs of eyes stared at me. Some looked curious, but most looked incredibly judgmental. They had probably been told all evening about how difficult and jealous the eldest daughter was. "Vivian," my father called out, raising his hand and waving me forward like a dog. "Come up here, please. Do not stand in the back like a stranger." I slowly pushed myself off the windowsill and walked toward the center of the room. The guests parted like the Red Sea to let me through. Every single step I took echoed heavily on the hardwood floor. I stopped just a few feet away from the dining table. My father reached into his suit jacket and pulled out the thick legal document Marcus had brought to my apartment. He laid it flat on the dining table right next to the 3-tier birthday cake. Next to the document, he placed an expensive gold fountain pen. "We need you to sign this waiver of inheritance right now, Vivian." my father said, his voice echoing with absolute authority in front of his friends. "It simply states that you recognize this house belongs to your sister, and you will not cause any legal trouble down the road. You promised me you would do this today, so please do not play the drama queen. Do not try to make this about you. Just sign the paper so your sister can finally have something to celebrate." The air in the room grew incredibly thick and suffocating. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to cry or yell or storm out of the house in a fit of dramatic rage. They wanted me to be the unstable spinster sister throwing a tantrum so they could feel justified in taking everything from me. Marcus crossed his arms and looked at me with an expression of pure victory. He thought he had completely backed me into a corner. He thought public pressure would force me into submission. Whispers began to rise all around me. At first they were only hushed murmurs, but then the sound grew louder, blending into the suffocating atmosphere of the room. All 25 guests were openly judging me. The women in expensive silk dresses covered their mouths as they whispered to one another. The men in elegant suits shook their heads in quiet disapproval. In their eyes, I was a bitter, single old woman, resentful, harsh, and deeply selfish. They thought I could not bear to see my sister happy. They were certain I was trying to ruin my mother's birthday party out of petty jealousy. I could clearly hear one of my mother's friends standing in the front row muttering that I was truly the disgrace of the family. She said I ought to know my place and sign that paper to redeem myself for all my faults. The cruelty of people who knew nothing about the truth hung in the air like needles. But I paid no attention to a single one of their judgments. I kept my back straight and continued walking slowly toward the dining table in the center of the room. Every step I took across the oak floor seemed to carry an invisible weight. As I came closer, my father smiled in triumph. He believed he had successfully used the pressure of the crowd to break my will. My mother stood beside him with her arms crossed and her chin tilted upward in pride. She was waiting for the moment I would kneel, apologize, and hand everything over to her favorite daughter. Chloe had her arms folded as she leaned against Marcus. The two of them looked at me as if I were the most pathetic failure in the world. The family's elderly lawyer, Charles, pushed his glasses higher up the bridge of his nose and cleared his throat. He had been loyal to my father for decades. He believed every lie my father had ever told. Charles calmly picked up the gold-plated fountain pen and held it out to me. "Please, Vivian," he said in a tone that sounded professional, yet deeply coercive. "You only need to sign in the bottom right corner of page 3. Once you do, our office will immediately proceed with the transfer of ownership of this house to Chloe and her husband. This will help your family avoid any unnecessary legal disputes in the future. Please complete it quickly so everyone can continue enjoying the party." I reached out and took the fountain pen from Charles's hand. The metal felt ice cold against my fingers. I lowered my eyes and stared at the inheritance waiver printed on expensive parchment paper. My father's forged signature was already in place under the section marked Authorizing Party. Marcus's name was printed in bold beneath the section marked Beneficiary. And there, waiting in silence, was a large blank space for my name. The entire room, all 25 people, held their breath at once. Not a single whisper remained. They were waiting for me to put pen to paper. They were waiting for the play to end. But what they did not know was that the real play was only just beginning. I lowered my eyes to the ridiculous inheritance waiver lying on the table. I picked up the gold-plated fountain pen. Its weight was perfectly balanced. Everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for my signature. My father smiled in triumph. Marcus smirked arrogantly. Chloe stood there with her arms crossed, looking at me with pity. They thought the pressure of the crowd had finally crushed me. I gripped both ends of the expensive fountain pen with my hands, and instead of lowering the nib to the paper, I snapped it in half with all my strength. The dry, sharp crack of breaking metal rang through the stunned silence. Black ink burst from the barrel, running down my fingers and dripping onto the oak table. A few drops splattered onto the inheritance waiver, turning Marcus's name into a black smear. All 25 people in the room gasped in shock. My mother stumbled back a step, clutching her chest. My father stared at me, his face shifting from smug satisfaction to pure fury. The old lawyer Charles stammered, unable to speak. "What the hell are you doing, Vivian?" My father roared, shattering the silence. "Have you lost your mind?" I did not answer him. Calmly, I pulled a silk handkerchief from my suit pocket and wiped the black ink from my fingers. Then I slowly opened my leather handbag. I did not rush. Every movement I made was deliberate, controlled, and full of authority. I reached inside and pulled out an old file folder yellowed with age. It bore the embossed red seal of the State Central Bank. I placed the file on the table right beside the pool of black ink and their worthless document. Then I lifted my head and looked my father straight in the eye. "You cannot give Marcus something you do not own," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was so cold and sharp that it could cut through every illusion in that room. "Everyone here believes you are a wealthy and generous man. But the truth is, 12 years ago, the bank officially repossessed this house because you were bankrupt and unable to pay your debts." I paused, letting my words sink into the mind of every person in the room. Whispers began to rise behind me. My father's upper-class friends exchanged stunned, suspicious glances. My father's face turned pale, drained of blood. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but his throat locked shut. This house was foreclosed on by the bank 12 years ago. I continued enunciating every word, clearly leaving no room for denial. And the private limited company that I own outright 100% bought it back in cash. I paid off all of your debts. I have paid the property taxes on this house for the last decade. You and Mother have lived here enjoying all this luxury entirely because of my money and my mercy. Then I turned to Marcus. The smug con man who had been smiling moments ago now looked like a fool. His eyes were wide fixed on the bank foreclosure documents lying on the table. "Marcus," I said, his name dripping with contempt. "Did you really think you could use my father's forged signature to mortgage my house and trick a bank into handing you $1.5 million? Did you really think you could steal my property while I was lying half dead in an emergency room? That's the tragic part for you. The only legal ownership documents for this house have always been locked inside my safe. You and your delusional wife do not own a single thing here." The enormous mansion fell into a silence so complete it was almost terrifying. No one dared breathe too loudly. No one dared move. The naked, brutal truth that had just been exposed crushed the false arrogance my family had spent years carefully constructing. And there I stood in the middle of the wreckage of their lies, feeling an absolute surge of power running through my veins. The silence that had fallen over the room was shattered by my mother's ragged gasp. Beverly staggered back another step, the heel of her shoe slipping on the polished hardwood floor. She wobbled and had to clutch the back of a dining chair to keep from collapsing. The tray in her hands tilted, sending a glass of red wine crashing onto the expensive wool rug, where it spread like a stain of blood. But no one cared about the broken glass. Every eye in the room was now fixed on Marcus. Marcus swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed frantically. The smug arrogance had completely vanished from his face, leaving behind nothing but raw panic. He quickly raised both hands in front of his chest in a pitiful gesture of surrender. "Vivian, listen to me," Marcus stammered, his voice shaking and cracking. "There has to be some huge misunderstanding here. I honestly had no idea the bank had foreclosed on this property. Your father told me he was still the legal owner. I swear I only wanted to use it as financial leverage to help our family. You're my wife's sister." "We're family. You can't blow this up like this." I stared directly into his pale, sweat-drenched face. He truly believed those clumsy lies could still save him. My sister Chloe had let go of her husband's arm by then. She looked at Marcus, then at me, her eyes wide with fear. She had always believed I was just a fool who buried herself in work and handed out money without limits. Now she was realizing she had just lost the only bank she had ever known. "Do not call me family," I said slowly, coldly, cutting through his pathetic pleading. "You left me alone in an emergency room for 6 hours while you all raised your glasses and celebrated finally getting rid of me. My mother said I was only trying to emotionally blackmail the family. My father called me selfish. And you, Marcus, you manipulated my family so you could steal my property the moment I came back from the edge of death. You all love calling me a drama queen, don't you? You said I always exaggerated everything and turned it into some tragic performance." I reached into my handbag once more. I could hear my father's uneven breathing and my mother's sobbing. The 25 guests now stood huddled in silence, not one of them daring to interfere with the sentence I was about to hand down. I pulled out one final set of documents. They were not old records from 12 years ago. This was a brand new contract, still crisp, with signatures freshly inked and dry as of yesterday morning. I dropped the latest sales contract onto the oak table. It landed on top of their torn inheritance waiver, smeared with black ink. Since everyone here agrees on calling me a drama queen, I declared clearly into the stillness of the room I decided to do something truly dramatic so no one would be disappointed. Yesterday I called a real estate brokerage firm. I sold this house and all the surrounding land to a private investment fund for $2.2 million in cash. The contract has been signed, and the money is now safely sitting in an independent trust under my sole control. My father's mouth fell open, his eyes bloodshot with fury. My mother burst into tears, covering her face with trembling hands. Chloe stumbled backward until her back hit the wall, as if someone had slapped her across the face. The new owner will arrive with a construction crew on Monday morning to replace every lock. I continued, each word striking like a hammer, driving nails into their coffin. Which means you have exactly 14 hours to remove all your clothes, your furniture, and every fake luxury item you own from my property. After that deadline, anyone still standing on this land will be removed by the police for criminal trespassing. I hope you all enjoy your Sunday evening of packing. I did not say another word. I did not need to wait for their curses or their begging. I turned my back on them and strode straight out through the front doors, each step strong and certain. Behind me, I left a fake empire collapsing into ruin. Behind me, I left the parasites to face the brutal truth of their lives at last. I took one long breath of the cold, clean winter air. My heartbeat was strong, steady, and completely free. The atmosphere in the living room suddenly shattered. There were no more fake smiles or hollow congratulations. The flawless mask of the Pierce family had officially fallen to the floor and broken into pieces. The upper-class guests began whispering among themselves, avoiding my parents' eyes. Quietly, they set their expensive champagne glasses down on the tables and hurried toward the door one by one. No one said goodbye. No one wanted to be associated with a mortgage fraud scandal and a family about to be thrown out onto the street. Marcus felt the full weight of the humiliation. He let out a furious roar. His face turned bright red. He lunged toward me, both hands clenched into fists, as if he wanted to tear me apart on the spot. I did not even blink. I stood still, crossed my arms, and looked him straight in the eye. "Take one more step, Marcus," I said, my voice cold and razor-sharp. "The local police station is only 5 minutes away. One call from me and you'll be in jail for assault on top of forgery and attempted bank fraud. Do you want to find out whether an orange prison uniform matches that expensive suit you're wearing?" Marcus froze. His legs locked in place. The cowardice of a con man showed itself instantly. He stepped back, his eyes filled with fear and bitter rage. In the corner of the room, Chloe collapsed onto the floor. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed uncontrollably. Her tears were not tears of regret or remorse. They were the tears of a spoiled child who had just had her most expensive toy taken away. She had finally realized that from this moment on, no one would be paying for her luxury vacations or her insane shopping bills anymore. The free bank named Vivian had officially shut down forever. My parents stood frozen beside the dining table. My father seemed to age 10 years in just a few seconds. His shoulders sagged, and his empty eyes stared at the house sale contract on the table. My mother leaned against the wall, completely drained of strength. They understood that they had lost everything. They had not only lost this magnificent mansion, they had also permanently lost the only daughter who had truly cared for them and carried them through life for the past 20 years. I bent down and picked up my handbag. I did not say another word of reproach. My silence at that moment was the cruelest punishment of all. I turned my back and walked away, my steps steady and firm across the wooden floor. I pulled open the front door and stepped outside. The winter wind hit my face, icy cold but unbelievably refreshing. I walked straight to my car, opened the door, and started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The brightly lit house behind me was now nothing more than a tomb burying the toxic past I had left behind. Not a single tear fell. The heart that had nearly stopped in the hospital was now beating with fierce strength and life. For the first time in all 56 years of my life, I was truly free. Last month, I officially moved into a luxurious penthouse apartment in Miami. Every afternoon, I sit on the breezy balcony watching the sun sink into the blue ocean while pouring myself a glass of fine wine. I no longer have to rush to check my phone to see who is asking me for money. I no longer have to pay enormous credit card bills for people who never once knew how to say thank you. My health has fully recovered. My cardiologist in Miami says that my heartbeat is now strong and steady. Of course it is, because I no longer have to carry the crushing weight of parasites disguised as family. The only problem in my life now is deciding whether I should fly to Italy for a vacation next month or go to France for a shopping trip instead. The money I worked so hard to earn is finally being used for my own happiness. If you are watching this video and you are also in your 50s or older, listen to me. Never let anyone trample on your self-respect just because they share your blood. Family love is supposed to be built on mutual respect and care, not used as a license to exploit you without shame. Never burn yourself just to keep warm the people who do not care how much pain you are in. You have sacrificed enough, and now you deserve to enjoy the very best years of your life. Have you ever used your financial independence and calm strength to teach ungrateful people a lesson they would never forget? Would you keep enduring it, or would you stand up and protect yourself the way I did? Leave a comment below and share your story. I will read every single one of your comments. If my story gave you strength, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories to come. Thank you for listening, and always remember you are the only person who holds the key to the value of your life.